People start their mornings in all kinds of ways. But at 76, you do not get many choices. I wake at 5:45 whether I want to or not. The bones that carried me across timber slopes and fire lines for decades creak and pop like old boards. And there is no bargaining with them. The first thing I do is look past the porch rail, to the ridge of lodgepole and ponderosa my wife loved. In April light the needles shine with a cold green, and a ribbon of snow still clings in the draws where sun has not yet reached. The ridge is a calendar I can read without glasses. It tells me when the river will run high, when the first smoke will rise in July, and when the elk will come down to test the fence. My name is Walter Grayson. I live alone in a cedar-framed cabin outside Bend, Oregon. A place I built with my own hands 40 years ago, when the county was more trees than houses. The stain has weathered, but the beams bite deep into basalt rock. A grip as sure as the vows Martha and I once made. She has been gone 5 years now. Cancer carried her away one pale October, and the house has never stopped echoing. The road out front is different from the one I remember. Back then it was gravel and dust. Now it is paved and lined with pale-sided boxes, where new families wave politely from their SUVs. They are kind enough, but their smiles are cautious, as if they are unsure how to stand in front of an old man who still splits his own kindling and wears a forestry cap that went out of style 30 years ago. I keep to habits. Coffee from the kettle on the wood stove. Checking the barometer by the door like it still matters when I no longer hike ridge lines. Grinding beans by hand because I prefer the sound to any machine. Martha used to tug the kettle away before it screamed and laughed that I looked like a stubborn boy in my corduroy shirt. She would kiss the scar on my wrist from the summer. A saw chain taught me respect. These days I pour for one, but muscle memory still tells me to set out a second cup. I let it sit on the counter like a stone laid over memory. Saturday means the market in town. Bend wakes slowly on those mornings. And by the time the tents rise, the air smells like donuts, onions, and damp rope. I park in the gravel lot and make the slow walk through the stalls. I buy eggs from a man with a sunburned neck, tomatoes from a woman whose hands look like my mother's after canning days. It costs more than the store, but I pay gladly. It tastes like August used to taste. People stop to nod, sometimes to talk. A few old co-workers still remember my days with the Forest Service. Fire seasons when we slept on the ground and woke to ash in our teeth. No one asks about my son, Colin. For that I am grateful. On the way back to the truck, a tight wire of pain pulls across my left forearm. It flashes and fades. I shake it out and tell myself it is nothing cold air. Lifting too quick. The small debts age collects. I place the crate in the cab and drive home with the window cracked, letting the pine air in. Back at the cabin, I set the eggs in a blue bowl and rinse the tomatoes. My small office off the kitchen holds a drafting table scarred with burns and gouges, a file cabinet, and the old radio that still reads out fire danger levels and lost dogs in the same calm voice. On the wall hangs a photograph. Martha, in denim. Me with more hair than sense. And Colin at 5 years old, standing in front of the new cabin with a toy truck in one hand and a pine cone in the other. He gave me the pine cone for luck. Asked me if the cabin would grow like trees if we watered it. I told him houses grow in the people who live there. I meant it then, and I believe it still. When he got older, the house shrank. Summers in town, winters behind a closed bedroom door. The years I spent on fire lines and timber surveys were years missed at games and concerts. Martha understood. She would tell me there was dignity in my work. Colin heard only absence. I tried to bridge the gap with bigger Christmases. Awkward fishing trips. Promises that did not heal old wounds. Resentment is water and stone. It finds cracks and makes them deeper. Dean Harper, my neighbor and closest friend, tells me often that the past is a place you can visit but not live. He says it every time I fall into the if-onlys. I hate him for it, until I hear myself breathing easier. Dean still brings over stew meat and a six-pack on Fridays. We sit on the porch, watch the ridge go dark, and laugh at the same story about the windstorm of '96. Ritual keeps a man steady. That afternoon the wind shifts and the little brass bell by the door rattles. Clouds lean over the ridge, white on top and steel below. Weather changes fast here. So do people. If you are not watching. I stack wood by the stove and feel the tug in my arm again. Sharper now. I breathe until it passes. I promise myself I will call the clinic on Monday. Promises to doctors are checks you write to yourself. They bounce if you let them. Dean arrives later with 2 brown bags and claims he bought onions at a price to make a saint swear. We cook. We laugh. We sit until the birds go quiet and the ridge falls into shadow. After he leaves, I wash dishes, place them in a neat row, and stand in the bedroom doorway staring at the quilt Martha pieced from old shirts. I lie down facing the window where the pine tops slice the stars into sharp rivers. Somewhere a coyote barks twice. Night settles in, patient and heavy. Sleep comes slow, then all at once, like snow. Before dawn, I wake again to the tug in my arm. It grips and lets go. I sit up and breathe. I tell myself I will call the clinic after coffee. People start their mornings in all kinds of ways. Mine begins with the kettle, the ridge, and one plain instruction I have followed most of my life: stand up, face what comes. The trees outside keep growing. I decide I will too. Memory is a stubborn thing. It does not care if you want it or not. It rises when it pleases. Sharp as an axe edge, dull as a rotting stump. The morning after market, while I shelled beans at the counter, I found myself pulled back to years when Colin still fit in the crook of my arm and smelled of cedar smoke and soap. I worked for the Oregon Forest Service back then. My job was to survey stands for thinning, walk firebreak lines, and coordinate crews that came from towns scattered all across the Cascades. It was work that never ended. In summer, I spent weeks in the mountains. In winter, I pored over maps until my eyes watered. We were not wealthy, but the paycheck was steady. The benefits meant Martha could stay home with Colin until he was in school. She never complained. She knew what the work gave us: a cabin with a roof that did not leak, wood stacked high against the wall, a little savings in the bank. But children do not measure love in fire breaks or mortgage payments. They measure it in bedtimes, in birthday candles lit on time, in fathers sitting in bleachers no matter how tired. I missed too many of those. Colin never let me forget. He was 12 when the first real crack showed. His friends bragged about ski trips and new snowboards. Colin asked me for one. I told him we could not swing it that year, that maybe we would find a used one come spring. His face went hard as stone. Other dads don't say maybe. Other dads say yes. Martha tried to soothe him, but something in his eyes that day stayed with me. It was not disappointment. It was contempt, small and sharp, like a nail underfoot. By 16, he wanted a truck. Every boy in Deschutes County seemed to want one. I told him I would match whatever he saved from summer jobs. He stared at me like I had slapped him. You've got plenty of money. Why make me beg? I thought I was teaching him responsibility. Instead, I taught him that his father's love came with conditions. He worked 2 weeks at a grocery store, then quit. Said the boss was unfair. The hours too long. Martha and I bought him a used Ford anyway. 3 months later, he spun it out on black ice while racing a friend. The truck was totaled. He walked away without a scratch. He never said thank you. Never said sorry. He only muttered that the county should salt roads better. Martha said, we spoiled him. She was right, though neither of us could admit it then. I wanted him to have what I never had. My father was a logger. My mother worked at a laundry in Klamath Falls. They raised me with calluses and discipline. At 12, I was stacking cords of wood. At 16, I could rebuild a carburetor. I swore my son would not scrape his knuckles bloody like I did. Instead, I gave him things he had not earned, and he learned to expect the world without lifting a hand. College should have been a fresh start. We sent him to Oregon State with tuition covered. I drove him to Corvallis with boxes in the bed of my truck, proud as any father. By Christmas, he was home. Sullen. He said professors were unfair, roommates too noisy, classes a waste. He bounced from one major to another until he quit altogether. The money we set aside trickled into nothing. He came back to Bend, worked odd jobs, and blamed me when they fell through. Then came Rachel. She was older, sharp-tongued, always dressed like she expected applause. She saw right through my son's hunger for approval and fed it with smiles. They married 6 months after meeting. I paid for the wedding against my better judgment. She toasted me at the reception, thanked me for setting them up for success, and the next morning asked for a loan. That pattern never stopped. Their children, Noah and Emily, were my only reprieve. I saw in them what I once saw in Colin when he was small innocence, not yet hardened into resentment. I set up trusts through Elaine Porter. My old college friend turned attorney. The funds could only be touched when the children turned 25. Colin did not know this. He thought the accounts were accessible. When he tried to withdraw money once, forging my name, Elaine called me immediately. I let it pass. I told myself Martha would want me to forgive. But even forgiveness, when given too easily, becomes a leash someone learns to pull. When Martha grew sick, I thought the storm would finally break into calm. Cancer cut her down in 2 winters. Colin visited twice, each time asking about the cabin, about what would happen after. He stood at her bedside, but his eyes drifted to the photographs on the wall, the antiques on the dresser. When she died, I buried not just my wife but the last bridge between father and son. I began to notice a pattern in Colin's voice. Every conversation circled back to the house. Too big for you. Dangerous for stairs. Think of the future. His future. Never mine. He claimed Rachel's family wanted to invest in a green lumber startup and that the cabin's value could seed the business. I had seen too many doomed ventures to believe him. So I acted. I filed for historic designation, tying the cabin to early forestry heritage. Without approval from the Preservation Board, Elaine among them, no sale could happen. I also installed cameras, not just in the yard but inside, tucked away where only I knew. After a burglary in the valley, I justified the expense. But the truth was simpler. I did not trust my own son. Even now, writing these words feels like betrayal, though the betrayal started long before. A father should not fear his child's ambition. Yet I did. The seed of resentment planted in teenage years had grown into a thicket, and every branch reached for what I had built. That night I sat by the fire, watching shadows climb the cedar walls, and remembered Martha's voice. Walter, you cannot fix what Colin will not face. She said it when he quit college, when he wrecked the truck, when he pawned his first wedding ring to cover a gambling debt. She was right. I could build bridges, but I could not force him to cross. Still, I held on to one hope, that someday Noah or Emily would walk through the cabin door laughing, chasing the smell of biscuits, not the lure of money. For them, I would keep the cabin standing, the ridge watching, the fire burning. For them, I would guard what was left. Outside, the wind pressed against the glass. I thought about my chest pains, the arm tightening. I thought about the cabin deed locked in Elaine's files. And I thought about Colin's last words. During our argument 2 weeks ago, you'll be gone soon. Why fight the inevitable? Resentment had turned into expectation, and expectation was turning into a plan. I could feel it in my bones. The air had that brittle edge only Oregon winters know. The kind that carries the scent of wet bark and wood smoke. Sharp as a saw blade. I was outside splitting a final load of kindling before the next storm rolled in. The ridge above me was striped with ice. Every strike of the maul cracked through the stillness, echoing off the trees. I should have stopped after 20 swings. But stubbornness is a sickness that does not fade with age. It began as a tug in my arm, then a heat blooming under the ribs. I tried to shake it away, but the axe slipped from my hand, burying itself half an inch into the frozen ground. I bent to pull it free, and the world tilted sideways. Snow and sky swapped places. My legs gave out, and I hit the ground hard. The breath tore from my chest. I reached for the porch railing 10 feet away, but my right arm lay slack, dead weight. I do not remember much after that, only the silence of the woods pressing in, the sound of blood pounding in my ears. Then Dean's voice, loud and panicked. He was calling my name. His boots crunched snow as he ran, cursing under his breath. A neighbor like him is not one. It is given by grace. He rolled me onto my back, saw my twisted face, and knew. Stroke, he muttered. His phone was already in his hand. By the time the sirens cut through the pines, I was drifting in and out, half in the world, half outside of it. The ambulance swallowed me. The cold traded for antiseptic light. I saw patches of sky through the back window, bare branches slicing it into shards. When I woke again, it was to pale green walls and the rhythmic beep of a monitor. NT. Charles Medical Center. The taste of copper on my tongue. My right side heavy as stone. I tried to speak. But the word caught, twisted into a sound I did not recognize. Panic clawed my chest. A nurse leaned over me. Young. With dark braids and steady eyes. Mr. Grayson. You've had a stroke, she said gently. Your speech will take time. Don't be afraid. You are stable. I wanted to ask, how bad? How long? But my lips betrayed me. All that came out was a hoarse murmur. She squeezed my hand. You're lucky your neighbor found you. If you'd been alone longer, the damage could have been permanent. Lucky. That word rang hollow. My body felt split, half alive, half wooden. By afternoon, a doctor came. Dr. Patel. Her badge read. Small woman. Brisk. Clear in her explanations. She told me the clot had been treated with thrombolysis. Your right side will improve with therapy. Speech too. But you must rest. No overexertion. No wood chopping for now. I wanted to laugh, but only a ragged sound emerged. It was evening when the door opened again, and I heard footsteps I knew as well as my own. Quick. Impatient. Clicking against linoleum. Colin. Dad. He exclaimed, too brightly. His voice filled the room like he owned it. You scared us half to death. Us. Meaning him and Rachel. But not Martha. Not anymore. I tried to answer, but only a garbled syllable came. He rushed over, patting my shoulder like he was steadying a child. Don't try to talk. The nurse said it'll come back with time. For a moment I thought I saw genuine worry, but then his eyes drifted around the room. The flowers. The chart. The absence of anything resembling permanence. His gaze settled on me again. Businesslike. We need to talk about the cabin. Even half paralyzed, I felt my stomach tighten. Always the cabin. You can't go back there, he said quickly, as if rehearsed. 2 stories. Icy stairs. No one around if something happens again. It's dangerous. You need proper care. I've been looking into facilities. He opened his satchel and pulled out glossy brochures. Pineview. Silver Pines. Meadow Hills. Smiling seniors in pastel sweaters. Shuffleboard courts. Pools. The kind of advertisements that make you think aging is just summer camp with pills. This one's great, Colin said, tapping a page. Full-time staff. Activities. Even a library. You'll have company? Dad. No more sitting alone in the woods. And it's close to us in Salem. Rachel and I could visit all the time. I stared at him. He never visited me when I was 15 minutes away. Why would he drive 2 hours now? I tried to protest, but the words tangled in my throat. Only a growl escaped. Colin smiled like I had agreed. I know it's hard to face, but you'll see it's for the best. You'll thank me later. My mind was burning. This was no spur-of-the-moment suggestion. He had planned this. My stroke was not tragedy to him, it was opportunity. He stayed another 20 minutes, talking mostly to himself. About monthly fees. About how we could cover them. About selling unnecessary assets. Each phrase cut like bark peeling from a wounded tree. He never once asked how I felt. If I was in pain. If I was frightened. His concern was measured in dollars and deeds. When he finally left, the room was quiet again. The brochures lay spread on my blanket like vultures. That night, I barely slept. My mind kept circling the same truth. I was no longer just a father recovering from a stroke. I was prey in my own son's eyes. And he had been circling for years. In the morning, when the nurse brought me a pen and notebook to practice with my left hand, I scrawled the first clear thought that came. 2 words. Call Elaine. The fight for my home had begun, and I would not fight it with an axe or with my fists. I would fight it with law, with patience, with every ounce of will still burning in me. The second morning in the hospital came with a cold light pouring through blinds and the smell of disinfectant that clung to my skin. I had managed to scrawl my son's name on a practice sheet with my left hand, shaky and uneven, but it was enough to prove that the hand still belonged to me. When the nurse asked if I wanted anything else, I pressed the notebook into her palm with 3 words scratched across it. Call Elaine Porter. By afternoon, she was standing at the foot of my bed. Elaine had not changed much. In 40 years, silver hair pinned neat, sharp gray eyes behind frameless glasses. The posture still so straight it made everyone else slouch. We had met at Oregon State when she was studying law, and I was grinding through forestry courses. She married, raised children, and buried her husband, but never left Bend. She had been Martha's friend long before she was my attorney. That meant she understood the family not just on paper but in blood and bone. Walter, she said softly, pulling up a chair. Dean called me last night. Said you had a scare. How are you feeling? I tried to answer. My words broken, but enough sense came through. Alive. Tired. Angry. Her eyes narrowed. At Colin. I nodded. She placed a leather folder on her lap. I suspected. Tell me what happened. I told her what I could, fighting each syllable like I was hauling logs uphill. About Colin's visit, the brochures for nursing homes, his insistence I could not return to the cabin, about the look in his eyes when he spoke of selling things. Elaine listened without interrupting, pen scratching across her pad. When I finished, she tapped the folder. If you remember when we met after Martha's funeral, when you asked me to prepare safeguards? Yes, I said. Good thing you listened, she said, voice clipped but steady. The cabin is registered under the Deschutes County Historic Preservation Board. No sale can happen without approval from the board. You and I are both on that board. Colin has no legal avenue to sell, with or without your signature. The deed is ironclad. Relief washed through me for a moment, then tightened again. He try. Oh. He will. Elaine agreed. That's why you installed cameras. Remember? I've accessed the cloud account. Everything is recorded. If he even brings a realtor into that house, well, have evidence. A heavy silence fell between us. My body ached, but it was my heart that throbbed hardest. Elaine, I whispered. He is my son. She reached for my hand, squeezing it with surprising strength. And you are my client and my friend. I will not let him steal what you bled to build. Sometimes protecting a family means protecting it from itself. Her words echoed like Martha's voice once had. That night, after she left, I lay staring at the ceiling, tracing cracks in the plaster. My mind drifted back to the first time Colin crossed a line. He was 19, angry after dropping out of college, desperate for money. I came home one evening to find my checkbook missing. Later, Elaine called someone had tried to withdraw funds from the tuition account with my forged signature. My son. My own blood. Martha convinced me to forgive, to chalk it up to immaturity. Hell grow out of it, she said. I wanted to believe her. I buried the anger under the weight of love. Now, decades later, the forgery had been practiced for something worse. 2 days into my hospital stay, a nurse delivered an envelope. Inside were papers, power of attorney documents, already filled out, waiting for my signature. No return address. But I did not need one. Colin. My jaw clenched. He thought I was weak enough to sign without looking. Or maybe he thought Rachel would lean over my bed, coax my trembling hand to paper, and claim I had agreed. When Elaine returned that evening, I showed her the papers. She flipped through, lips tight. Sloppy forgery, she muttered. Not even witnessed correctly, but dangerous if a buyer does not check closely. What do? I asked. Shred them. An ill-file notice, with the county clerk, that no documents bearing your name are valid without my office confirming them. That will block any fake powers of attorney. If Colin tries again, it'll trigger a fraud alert. I nodded, though my chest felt like stone. My son was not only circling like a predator, he was sharpening his teeth. Later that night, Dean visited. He carried a thermos of stew and the weight of unspoken words. He sat by my bed, poured broth into a plastic cup, and watched me sip slowly. You know, he's planning something, Dean said. His tone held no judgment, only sorrow. I saw his truck outside your cabin yesterday. Strangers with him. They looked like real estate types. My hand trembled around the cup. Cameras. I reminded myself. Elaine had the recordings. but hearing it spoken by someone who had stood on my porch made the betrayal hit harder. Dean leaned closer. "You have to be ready. He isn't the boy you raised anymore." I wanted to argue. I wanted to defend my son. But the words would not come. And not only because of the stroke. Somewhere deep down, I knew Dean was right. Sleep evaded me that night. Machines beeped softly. Nurses padded in and out. And still my mind spun. Every board I nailed into that cabin. Every evening Martha cooked soup by the stone fireplace. Every photograph on the wall, Colin saw none of it. He saw numbers. He saw cash. I whispered into the dark, my voice halting but clear enough. "Martha, what would you have me do?" Of course. No answer came. Only the steady drip of an IV, and the sound of my own breath. But in the silence, I made a vow. I would not let Colin decide my future. If I had to fight him with lawyers, with detectives, with every breath left in my chest, so be it. The cabin was more than timber and stone. It was my life, my love, my legacy. And I knew now that my son would not stop until he tried to take it from me. The hospital nights blurred together, hours marked by the hiss of oxygen tanks and the shuffle of rubber soles. My speech was improving. Each day words returning like cautious deer, stepping out of the timberline. By the third evening, I could string together short phrases without choking. The therapists called it progress. I called it stubbornness. It was near dusk when the phone on the nightstand buzzed. My hand trembled as I lifted it. But when I saw the name, my chest tightened harder than any stroke could manage. "Colin." "Dad," he said. Too loudly. Too brightly. "Good news." I braced myself. "What news?" The words slurred. But they were clear enough. "I did it," Colin said. "I sold the cabin." The sentence hit harder than any axe to the chest. "What?" "Don't panic. It's done. The market is hot right now. And I found buyers who paid top dollar. $740,000 for the place. Can you believe it? Way above appraisal. And I sold your old Ford. $228,000 from a collector in Portland. That's nearly $750,000. Dad. You should be proud." My hand gripped the phone so tight my knuckles burned. "No, right?" I forced out. Colin chuckled nervously. "I know you're upset. But this is the best thing for you. You can't live out there alone anymore. You nearly died last week. You need care. Real care. Pineview is ready for you. I already put down the deposit for your room. You'll love it. Library. Gardens. Staff on call 24/7. I even picked a corner unit. And the rest of the money is in a secure account for your expenses. Everything's taken care of." I closed my eyes, fighting the dizziness. His words weren't just a plan, they were a verdict. Spoken like he was the judge and I the criminal. "Fraud," I whispered. Silence on the line. Then a scoff. "Dad. Don't start. I am your son. Who else should manage your affairs? Rachel and I are doing this for you." "For me?" My voice cracked. "You thief." He hissed, like a snake caught under a boot. "Don't call me that. You don't understand. Richard Jenkins, the buyer, has already signed contracts. We can't just cancel without penalty. You'll make yourself sick, chasing lawyers. Do you want another stroke?" It was the oldest weapon in his arsenal. Fear. I had once caved when he threatened to leave college. When he threatened to cut me off from his children. But not this time. "Cameras," I said slowly. Deliberately. "What?" "Cameras, house. Recordings." The line went dead quiet. I could almost hear the gears grinding in his head. "You're bluffing," he said at last, voice shaky. "You never wanted cameras. Said they were a violation." "People change," I rasped. "Everything you did on record." His breath caught. "Even if that's true, what are you going to do? Call the police? Turn in your own son? You wouldn't." "I will," I said. His tone shifted, hardening into anger. "Think about Noah and Emily. Do you want them to see their grandfather drag their mother and father into court? Is that what you want their memory of you to be? The man who destroyed his own family?" Guilt stabbed me, as it always had. But this time I gritted through it. 3 days. I said firmly. Return money. Cancel deal. Or police. He laughed bitterly. You're serious. God. You really would sell me out. After everything I sacrificed for you. Sacrifice? The word rasped out of me like smoke. You took. Always took. His voice dropped into a snarl. Fine. Do what you want. But you'll regret it. You'll die in that cabin alone, while everyone else moves on. The call ended with a sharp click. I let the phone fall onto the blanket, my chest heaving. The monitor beeped in protest. A nurse rushed in, asking if I was in pain. I waved her off. The pain was not physical. It was the sound of my son's voice, cold and hungry, echoing in my head. The next morning, Elaine arrived, her eyes scanning me before she spoke. You look like hell. What happened? Colin called. I said. Said sold cabin. Her lips tightened. Impossible. He doesn't have authority. Did he mention the buyer? Name Jenkins. Elaine opened her folder. I'll look into it. Likely a straw buyer. If contracts were signed, they'll collapse once we prove lack of consent. But Walter, we need to prepare for the worst. He may already be spending the money. I told her about the 3-day deadline. She raised an eyebrow. You gave him an ultimatum? Yes. A small smile tugged her mouth. Good. Let's see if he panics. That evening, Dean came by the hospital with a paper bag of stew. He sat quietly, spooning food into bowls. After a while, he said, Saw a moving truck at your place yesterday. Strangers carrying boxes out. Not furniture antiques. The spoon slipped from my fingers. What antiques? The mantel clock. The quilt chest. Looked like more, too. His voice was heavy. Walter. I think he's stripping the house. My blood turned to ice. I called Elaine immediately. She swore softly. Then promised to check pawn shops first thing. 2 hours later, my phone buzzed again. Colin's name. My hand shook as I answered. You happy now? His voice was tight. Panicked. The police came by today. Asking questions. Asking about fraud. Did you call them? I warned you. I said. You'll ruin me. He hissed. Rachel's in tears. The kids are terrified. How can you do this to your own family? How could you do this to me? A long pause. Then, in a voice stripped of charm. We already spent $90,000. Dad. Paid off debts. Invested the rest. You can't undo that. Even if you cancel the deal, the money's gone. I closed my eyes, feeling my pulse thunder. 3 days. I repeated. You're insane, he snapped. You'll destroy us all. Better than you destroying me. I ended the call. The room fell silent except for the monitors, steady beeping. I stared at the ceiling, at the cracks like branching veins, and whispered to Martha's memory. He thinks I won't do it. But I will. Because sometimes a father's love is not covering sins with silence. Sometimes it is forcing your child to face the truth, even if it means losing them forever. The 3rd day came with a hard frost on the hospital windows, thin white veins spreading across the glass. My body ached less. Though the right arm still felt like a log, I had to drag wherever I went. But my mind was sharp. Too sharp. Every tick of the clock was a reminder. Colin's deadline was closing. Elaine arrived mid-morning with someone at her side. A tall man in a plain gray suit, badge clipped to his belt. His name was Detective Javier Marquez, Fraud Division. He shook my hand firmly, then pulled a chair close. His eyes were kind but no nonsense. The kind of gaze that told you had seen everything from pyramid schemes to children forged into pawns. Mr. Hewan. Grayson. He began. Your lawyer brought me video footage from your cabin cameras. I reviewed them this morning. My chest tightened. Show. He opened a laptop. On the screen, the front door of my cabin appeared. Colin stood there with 2 men in business coats. He unlocked the door with my spare key and walked them through like a realtor, pointing to beams, the fireplace, even Martha's quilt chest. My stomach turned at the sight. Hair's the kicker, Marquez said. Fast forwarding. He hands over documents, a power of attorney form with your name printed at the bottom. They shake. They talk numbers. Clear attempt to represent himself as having your legal authority. That, sir, is fraud. The word hit me like cold water. Fraud. My son. We also traced the buyer. The detective continued. Richard Jenkins isn't local. He's part of an investment group in Seattle. They've been flipping historic properties across the Northwest. Colin tried to pass himself off as your legal representative. But once our office flagged the paperwork, the deal froze. Relief washed through me, but it was shallow. Money? I asked. Some deposits already transferred. Marquez admitted. About 90,000. Spent within 48 hours, debts paid. Funds wired into a startup venture. We're tracking accounts. The rest is recoverable. Elaine placed a steady hand on my arm. You see, Walter, we can block most of it. But we need your cooperation. Marquez leaned closer. Here's the part I won't sugarcoat. If you want charges filed, we have enough. Forgery. Wire fraud. Attempted property theft. He could face prison. The word prison echoed in my head like an axe striking stone. Colin behind bars. My son. My Martha's boy. Do I have choice? I asked quietly. The detective nodded. Yes. You can press charges. Or you can decline. But without a clear consequence. I promise he'll try again. Men like your son don't stop when the first scheme fails. They escalate. My throat burned. I remembered the boy with the pine cone. The teenager sulking over a used truck. The man sneering about inevitable inheritance. Where had I lost him? When had the son become a predator, circling his own father? Dean came later, carrying his familiar thermos. He listened as Elaine and Marquez laid everything out again. When they left, Dean stayed, sipping coffee in silence until I spoke. He is my son, I whispered. Dean's face was lined with more sorrow than anger. And you're his father. But Walter, that doesn't give him the right to bleed you dry. I send him to prison, I said hoarsely. What kind of father does that? The kind who saves his grandchildren from growing up thinking crime is normal, Dean said. His words were blunt, but his eyes glistened. That night I lay awake, wrestling ghosts. Martha's voice came back to me, soft and steady. I realized she had known this day would come. She had tried to prepare me for it. On the morning of the deadline, Colin called. His voice was raw, desperate. Dad, listen. I can fix this. Just give me more time. We're about to hit big with this lumber startup. Once it takes off, you'll have more money than you ever dreamed. You lied, I said slowly. I had to, he shouted. I was drowning. Rachel's family, everyone depends on me. If you go to the cops, I am finished. Do you want that on your conscience? You finished yourself, I replied. He was silent. Then his voice broke into pleading. Think about Noah and Emily. They'll hate you for this. They'll think you destroyed their father. I closed my eyes. The children's faces swam before me, soft and innocent. My chest twisted. But then I remembered the quilt chest, the mantel clock, the forged papers. His betrayal had already stolen enough. 3 days gone. I said, No. No. Please. Dad, he begged. But I ended the call. Elaine and Marquez came within the hour. I handed them the phone, the recordings, every scrap of evidence. My voice shook, but my words were steady. Press charges. Marquez nodded once. Understood. For the first time in decades, I felt the weight lift. Not joy. Not triumph. Just a heavy kind of peace that comes when you finally stop pretending. That evening, Dean sat with me as the sun bled across the ridge. You did the hardest thing a father can do, he said quietly. I stared at the line of trees turning black against the sky. Maybe, I whispered. Or maybe the only thing. The room fell silent. Only the monitor beeped, steady as a heartbeat. But inside me, I knew there was no turning back now. The following days were a blur of phone calls, paperwork, and questions from detectives. I tried to keep up, but my body reminded me with every step that I was still healing from the stroke. My right arm trembled when I lifted a spoon. My speech came slow, words sticking like burrs in my throat. Still, my mind refused to let go. By Wednesday afternoon, Detective Marquez came back, his face harder than before. He laid a folder on my bedside table. Inside were photographs, grainy surveillance stills from a pawn shop in downtown Salem. "Recognize these?" he asked. I stared at the images. My mantel clock. Martha's wedding ring. Even the rifle Dean and I had restored together decades ago. All tagged, priced, and sitting under glass. My chest clenched so tight, I thought the stroke had returned. "Colin pawned them?" I rasped. "Sold them outright," Marquez said grimly. 8,000 cash. Shop owner swears he asked no questions. Oregon law makes it messy. But we've got receipts. He signed his own name. Not very bright. I shut my eyes. The mantel clock had ticked through every Christmas, every birthday, every argument and reconciliation. Martha's ring. I still remembered the way her hands trembled when I slipped it on her finger under the summer sun in 1963. Now those pieces of my life sat behind dirty glass in a pawn shop. Marquez continued, his tone low. "We also discovered something else. Colin filed paperwork last week at the county clerk's office. A will. Supposedly yours." My heart stuttered. "Mine?" He slid a copy across the table. At the top, my name. At the bottom, a shaky scrawl meant to pass for my signature. The document left everything house, land, accounts to Colin outright. Not a cent for the grandchildren. Not a word about Elaine's safeguards. The room tilted. I gripped the bed rail. He forged my will. Yes, Marquez confirmed. And he had it notarized by a man who has since gone missing. We're trying to track him down. I couldn't speak. I thought of Martha again. Her gentle voice saying, "You cannot fix what he will not face." She had been right. But I had never imagined the depth of Colin's fall. Dean came later that night. He listened while Elaine and Marquez explained the forgery. His jaw tightened, eyes burning. "That boy doesn't just want your money," he muttered. "He wants your legacy. He wants to erase you." I looked down at my trembling hands. And he almost did. The next morning brought worse news. Colin and Rachel had vanished. Neighbors reported seeing them load suitcases into their SUV late at night. The children were with them. By dawn, the house stood empty. They could be headed out of state. Marquez told me grimly. Maybe Canada. Maybe Mexico. We've put out alerts. But they planned this. They closed accounts, sold assets, left their phones behind. It's going to take work. I felt sick. Not just for the betrayal, but for Noah and Emily, dragged into a fugitive's life they never chose. I imagined their small faces peering out from a back seat stuffed with luggage, wondering why their father drove so fast, why their mother hushed them when they asked about school. That afternoon, a letter arrived at the hospital. No return address, just my name written in Rachel's handwriting. My hands shook as I tore it open. "Dad." It began. Colin's voice echoed through the words. "By now, you've ruined everything. I had a chance to build something big, but you couldn't keep your nose out of it. Now the police are after me, and you've left me no choice. I am taking my family somewhere safe, somewhere you'll never find us. Maybe one day the kids will understand why I had to do this. You'll regret not trusting me. Goodbye." The paper slipped from my fingers. Dean caught it before it hit the floor. "He's running scared," he said. "No," I whispered. "He's running broken." Elaine came the next day with another revelation. Her law firm had traced Colin's startup investment. It was a sham, an offshore shell company registered in Panama. Every dollar he had stolen was already gone, funneled into accounts that would be nearly impossible to recover. He burned it all, Elaine said softly. Every cent. I stared at her, numb. Why? Why destroy everything for nothing? Because he thought he could outsmart everyone, she answered. But greed isn't clever. It's blind. That evening, while the winter wind rattled the hospital windows, I asked Dean to bring me something from the cabin. Moby Dick, I told him. He knew the one. Inside its pages lay the spare key to my office safe. When he returned, I opened the safe with trembling hands. Inside were the documents Terrence and I had prepared months earlier. The trust for my grandchildren. The real will. Notarized and filed. With every safeguard Elaine had added. Untouched. Secure. I let out a shuddering breath. Colin hadn't found this. He had forged his own will because he couldn't breach the true one. My heart swelled with relief. My grandchildren's future was safe. For now. Dean clapped a hand on my shoulder. See. Walter, you weren't paranoid. You were prepared. Still, I felt no triumph. Only grief. My son had chosen lies, theft, and flight. He had pawned our memories, forged my name, and dragged his children into exile. That night, as I lay awake in the dim hospital room, the truth settled heavy in my bones. Colin was no longer just a reckless son. He was a fugitive, a fraud, and a thief. The boy I once carried on my shoulders through the orchards of Eugene was gone. What remained was a man I barely recognized. And yet, beneath all the betrayal, a part of me still hoped. Hoped that somewhere down the road, when the running ended and the consequences caught up, Colin might remember the pine cone he once gave his mother. That he might remember he had once been a boy who knew how to love. But for now, I had to face reality. The law would pursue him. The courts would decide. And I, Walter Grayson, I had to let go of the illusion that I could save him from himself. When dawn came, cold and gray, I whispered into the pale light. Martha, I tried. God help me. I tried. I was discharged from the hospital on a crisp February morning. Elaine drove me back to the cabin, though it no longer felt the same. The air inside carried the faint trace of strangers' shoes, of doors opened by hands that weren't mine. Martha's quilt chest still stood against the wall, but its lid gaped where Colin had rifled through it. My mantel clock had been returned, but the small nick along its brass frame told me it had been handled roughly, without reverence. Dean helped me settle into my chair by the fireplace. He poured coffee into the mug that still bore Martha's initials. For the first time in weeks, I sat in my own house, listening to the silent stretch. Feels different, I said quietly. Dean nodded. Places hold memory. But they also hold scars. Later that afternoon, Elaine arrived with a folder of documents. She set them gently on the table. Walter, we've completed the filings. Colin's forged will has been voided. Your trust for Noah and Emily is secure. The property is legally shielded. Whatever he does now, he cannot touch this house again. Her words steadied me. For months, I had lived in fear that Colin would strip away everything Martha and I built. Now, finally, the storm had passed. But the cost weighed heavy. My son was gone, vanished into the ether with debts, forged papers, and broken promises. The grandchildren I loved were somewhere out there, dragged from school and home, forced into hiding. And I was left in the cabin, surrounded by ghosts. 2 weeks passed. Detective Marquez came once, hat in hand. We've put out notices. Canada, Mexico, airports. But if he's careful, he could stay hidden a long while. I wanted to prepare you for that. I nodded. I had already braced myself for the possibility. Sometimes justice moved slowly. Sometimes it never arrived in the form you wanted. That evening, Dean brought over fried chicken, and we ate in the kitchen like two old bachelors. Halfway through, he looked at me and said, Walter, you can't sit in this cabin waiting for news that may never come. You need something new. I chewed slowly, his words turning over in my mind. New. The idea seemed impossible at 78. And yet, I remembered Martha once telling me, life doesn't stop until you let it. The next morning, I called Elaine. I want to sell the cabin, I told her. She was startled. Walter, are you sure? This house is protected. It's safe. I know, I said. But it's also filled with shadows now. This place has been stained by lies. Pawn slips. Forged papers. I want something smaller, closer to town. A place that feels like mine again. Not Colin's crime scene. Elaine understood. Within weeks, the cabin was listed. A young family from Portland visited, their 2 little girls racing up the stairs with shrieks of laughter. For a moment, I saw Noah and Emily in their faces, and the sound pierced my chest. But then I smiled. Children belonged here again. Not bitterness. Not betrayal. By April, the sale was finalized. I moved into a modest house in a quiet neighborhood near Corvallis. A single-story home with a wide porch and a garden waiting for tomatoes. Dean helped me plant the first seedlings. Elaine brought over curtains. For the first time in a long while, I felt lighter. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the fields, I sat on the porch with Dean. He poured us each a measure of whiskey. The crickets hummed. And for once, I felt no ache of dread in my bones. "Do you regret it?" Dean asked. "What?" "Turning Colin in. Pressing charges. Letting the law have him." I thought for a long time, staring at the horizon painted gold. "No," I said finally. "I regret that it came to that. I regret the boy I lost along the way. But I don't regret drawing a line. Sometimes love isn't keeping someone safe. Sometimes love is letting them fall hard enough to learn." Dean raised his glass. "To lines." Then I raised mine. "To lines." Weeks later, a postcard arrived. No return address, just like before. On the front, a picture of a mountain village in South America. On the back, 4 words in Colin's handwriting: "The kids are fine." I stared at it for a long while. Fine. Such a small word. No apology. No promise. Just proof of life. I pinned it to my fridge. Not as forgiveness. Not as comfort. But as a reminder that they were still out there. And maybe one day, when the children were grown, they would seek me out. In the meantime, I had work to do. The trust Elaine had set up would ensure Noah and Emily had a future, whether Colin ever paid for his choices or not. And I had a new garden to tend, books to read, evenings to spend with Dean watching baseball on the old television. Life wasn't over. As spring ripened into summer, I found a strange peace. Every morning, I brewed coffee, sat on the porch, and watched the world wake. The loss of my son weighed on me, but it no longer crushed me. It had become part of my story, like the scar on my arm or the ache in my hip, a reminder of what I had endured and what I had chosen. Because that was the real lesson. In the end, life doesn't measure you by what others steal from you, or even by the betrayals you suffer. It measures you by the choices you make when tested. I chose to protect my legacy, to defend my grandchildren's future, to stop enabling a son who would destroy himself and everyone around him. It was the hardest choice of my life, but it was the right one. Sometimes love means building fences, not bridges. Sometimes love means saying no, even to your own blood. And so, at 78, I began again. Not with the son I had raised, but with the friends who stood beside me, the neighbors who waved as I walked down the block, the soil under my fingernails, and the hope that one day, 2 children named Noah and Emily would find their way back to me. On the last night of June, I sat on my porch under a sky splattered with stars. I raised a glass of whiskey toward the heavens. "To you, Martha," I whispered. I kept the promise the only way I knew how. The breeze stirred, soft and gentle, as if she were answering. And for the first time in many years, I smiled without bitterness. Because even in loss, there had been a lesson. A brutal, necessary, unforgettable lesson. That dignity is worth protecting, even if it costs you the love of the person you once held most dear.